Waking up from a cult is a process that has very seldom been studied, so there's unfortunately no guide for it. It's a complex process of learning and self-discovery that can't be rushed, and it often takes longer than the person thinks it will take. That's because when you're indoctrinated into a cult, you don't know just how much of your thoughts are controlled by cult indoctrination. And that's the most important thing. If you don't know that the cult plays that way of thinking into your head, you might never realize that it doesn't belong there. Cults often shape our whole personality around indoctrination. So it can fool people who are leaving into thinking realizing the cult was wrong is enough to leave indoctrination behind. It's not. Often, the waking up process starts with just one question that indicates that the cult may be wrong in something. Once the person starts to look for the truth, then the illusion that the cult was right all the time shatters, and the person feels free to go against the cult, knowing that the cult isn't always right. However, this waking up process will only debunk beliefs that are connected with each other. For example, someone in the Jehovah's Witness religion may realize that the shunning process is not actually biblical and starts reading the Bible to figure out which parts are biblical and which parts are not. At the end of the process, they may realize that this religion is not biblical and therefore it's wrong. They might believe that they have gotten rid of cult indoctrination, but the person may have never realized of how they were manipulated into compliance in the cult, and may still even try to manipulate others the same way they were manipulated in their day-to-day without thinking, because the way the cult manipulated them isn't gonna be in the Bible, so they might never know the behavioral indoctrination that remains in them. That's why here I'll go through not how 1914 is a made-up apocalyptic year, but into another indoctrination areas that aren't as talked about and are probably harder to get rid of. Jehovah's Witnesses are against getting psychological therapy. They were very much against it in the past and are tacitly against it in modern times. Instead, Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed to go to the elders when they have these kinds of problems, so the elders can re-indoctrinate them into at least suppressing those thoughts by praying and by working for the cult instead. This technique of repression is extremely damaging, but if you've been in the cult for long enough, it's likely the only kind of therapy you've ever had access to. I hear a lot of people who wake up saying that they don't need therapy and that they get why people do it, but there's no way therapy is for them. As if therapy is some sort of skinny jeans which you've decided are not for you anymore. This is more likely than not wrong, and might even indicate that they're still using suppressive techniques to deal with their issues because it's the only way the cult taught them how. Exiting a cult is a little bit like surviving a car accident where you hit your head. Would you trust someone who just hit their head in a bad car crash to be good enough to determine by themselves whether or not they should be checked out by a doctor? A hit in the head is a big thing, and you will not know just how much damage you have until a doctor takes a look at it. The earlier, the better. There's no, I don't think doctors are for me kind of thing. You need to get checked out. It's the same thing when you exit a cult. You just went through a traumatic experience that leaves most people with a lot of issues. You are not qualified to determine that a doctor shouldn't check you out because your mind was already tricked by a cult. So you literally have no reason to trust it when it tells you that it's fine. The earlier you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, the better. Tell them about your childhood. Tell them about how your life has been so far in the cult and how you envision your life outside of the cult. Tell them everything that worries you and ask them all the questions you will inevitably have about the world and how you look at it. Let a psychiatrist tell you that you don't need a psychiatrist, because just as hitting your head, you cannot know the gravity of the situation until you get checked by a doctor. Jehovah's Witnesses believe a fallacy that a lot of people believe too. That we have reached the end of history and things the way they are right now are how they should always be. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe they have literally reached the end of humanity. A period where Satan has proven that he cannot rule humans. In a period where humans have proved that they cannot rule themselves. And it can be hard to get rid of this way of seeing the world because it feels right. It's like when you're a kid and you feel like anything that happened before you were born is kind of ancient history and completely unimportant. In reality, we will only reach the end of human history when humanity dies for whatever reason. And while some may argue that that's where we are going, that doesn't mean that we have reached the end of history just yet. And while you may know that Armageddon isn't actually coming, you may still fall into thinking that we have reached the end of history by thinking that transsexual people are somehow ruining this generation just because they are finally not as invisible as before. Or even that capitalism is the best and only possible economical and political system because everything else has already been tried and failed. Some others take this quasi-apocalyptical view and apply it to the religion they left, thinking there are signs of the end of this religion and that the Jehovah's Witnesses are just about to crumble, as I've explained in a video that I've made before. In reality, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow because you were in a cult and you barely know what happened yesterday. It can be easy to see your first Jehovah's Witness documentary being released and think, oh, this is how it begins. The fall of the Jehovah's Witness religion is upon them. Because that's how the Jehovah's Witnesses taught you to behave. And because you don't know that there's a new Jehovah's Witness documentary seemingly every other year. Why? Because you were in a cult and you were forbidden from knowing these documentaries ever existed. And I'm not saying this religion is never going to die. In fact, if you followed me for long enough, you know that I have the somewhat controversial belief that we will see this religion fall apart within our generation. But I believe this religion is going to die out of apathy from most members. Not out of a documentary or a news channel reporting or documenting some random case about abusive conduct being hidden from the police. We haven't reached the end of history. And that's amazing because that means you can help find ways to make the world a better place. This leads me to the following point. Jehovah's Witnesses are an isolationist supremacist group that believes in the death of anyone who isn't a part of their group. If you ask them about Palestine and Israel, they'd say both of them deserve to be exterminated unless they convert to their religion. This kind of heartless and inhuman attitude can only be sustained by supremacist beliefs combined with their astounding ignorance about the socio-political climate they live in. The Jehovah's Witnesses are some of the most politically ignorant people out there, since they aren't to even take sides or vote during the elections. This creates an environment where political ignorance is encouraged, often protected by their isolationist views. Instead of getting informed in the world around them, the Jehovah's Witnesses adopt a very ignorant take of believing everyone should isolate themselves from political movements because they're all dumb and doomed to fail anyway. That's because they don't want you to know that getting involved in politics is the most tactile way at your disposal to improve the world. And the world needs improving because our current capitalistic system is destroying it for profit. The world needs you to get involved, especially because you probably haven't been involved in politics whatsoever before. You probably even have contradictory political views and haven't even realized you do. I know I used to believe in both workers' rights and in less involvement of the government in private business, which is inherently contradictory. You don't need to get a degree in political sciences to know politics though. Just spend time reading about different political schools of thought so you can make better decisions whenever you're voting or looking for a cause to advocate. and make sure to keep listening to the opposite side to avoid falling into an echo chamber. The worst you can do is remain in the Jehovah's Witness belief that everyone should just isolate themselves and not take a side in anything, because then you will never be a part of the solution. Learn which political systems benefit people and which don't, so you can do your part in improving your community and your country. And also stop defending Israel. There's no excuse anymore. The Jehovah's Witness religion is a narcissistic organization that believes it's at the center of a giant battle between good and evil. They have a superiority complex and believe they have everything figured out and everyone else is just too worldly to see the truth, and have this us versus them mentality with anyone who disagrees with them. There is little empathy for those who disagree with them, actually, because they teach they are destined to die in Armageddon anyway. This narcissism can still be seen in some who don't have empathy towards the indoctrinated members of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or who still have an us versus them mentality towards them, thinking that they are somehow superior to indoctrinated Jehovah's Witnesses just because they figured out that they were being lied to and believing Jehovah's Witnesses haven't. And you can see remnants of this narcissistic trait when people still hold supremacist views about their beliefs. Jehovah's Witnesses think they are a very unique and special group of people that have exclusive knowledge of this world, and hence view any worldly person as ignorant and dismiss their views. Because they don't know about Armageddon, so how could they teach you anything? And once you exit the cult, you may feel the same way about whatever you end up believing. Feeling like whatever you believe now is the truth and there is no valid way to see things differently. I've seen some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses be completely against religion, thinking every Muslim is an extremist, and everyone who doesn't feel the same way is fooled by the system. Some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have even told me that feminism, communism, or evolution are all cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they didn't learn the definition of cult when they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they never learned it when they exited the Jehovah's Witness cult either. This can be extremely dangerous, because if you're stubborn on your current beliefs, how will you know if your beliefs are wrong again? You should get rid of this dogmatic way of seeing the world and be open to changing your mind if all the evidence points at you being wrong. You can also see the narcissism of the Jehovah's Witnesses with their toxic positivity, which I've also made a video about, where they always remind themselves to smile so they can show they're the happiest people on earth, regardless of how they're actually feeling. In reality, asking people to smile is creepy because you're basically asking them to look more pleasant to you, which is inherently narcissistic. This feeling of being in the center of the world that Jehovah's Witnesses have can also be seen when ex-Jehovah's Witnesses believe they're being attacked by Watchtower, or that Watchtower watches the videos that they put out and keep track of all apostates. In reality, there is some reason to suggest that they are at least aware of some apostates, as they've sent me copyright strikes already, so they clearly know that we exist. But there's no reason to believe that they're actively going against apostates other than striking their channels every now and then, or that they watch every single video that apostates put out. In reality, although I do think that they watch some videos, especially when it's about a leak or about an apostate coming out or something else that concerns them, there's no reason to believe that we are that important to them, because even the best apostate won't be able to wake up as many Jehovah's Witnesses as the cult itself is doing, with all this nonsensical changing of doctrine and such. Regardless of what we'd like to think of ourselves, apostates are of little impact in waking up other Jehovah's Witnesses. We merely provide content for Jehovah's Witnesses who are already waking up. If you were a Jehovah's Witness, you were taught you were an extremely important part of the battle between good and evil, being looked at by angels to make sure that you did the right thing. It can be tempting to continue to think that you're still equally important, being watched by Watchtower at every turn. In reality, waking up also involves realizing that you were never as important as the cult taught you were, and that what you do should matter only to you and to the people who you are affecting. Jehovah's Witnesses have all of these Pharisaical rules about everything, from dress and grooming to the thoughts that you're allowed to have in your head. Once you leave a high control group, it can be easy to spring into all the things you were not allowed to do. And that can be dangerous because you're getting rid of your old moral compass that you realize was useless and nobody actually follows, but you need to replace it with a moral compass that does work. I see people struggling to wake up from this, divided in two camps. One camp is extremely judgmental and gets mad at me for painting my nails, smoking weed, swearing, and all that stuff because they believe that they should somehow keep the moral compass that their religion gave them, even if they're not in their religion anymore. These are the people who think Jehovah's Witnesses would get stumbled if they saw an apostate like me living their life while not following the rigid conduct that a Jehovah's Witness is incapable of following. They show they still have this philosophy of keeping up appearances to attract people to your side. Why they think that would work when it doesn't even work for Jehovah's Witnesses, I have no idea. The other camp is people who think everything is permissible. Cheating on your wife, supporting sex trafficking, victimizing Jehovah's Witnesses, and a lot more things are okay because there's no Armageddon coming, so you can do whatever you want. Both of them are obviously wrong. I'm not going to tell you which morals you should have. That's something you need to figure out on your own. But I think I can definitely tell you that you should have them and that they shouldn't come from a religion you realized was wrong already. If you're leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses or any other high control group, you need to replace your moral compass with one based on logic, science, kindness, and the value of life, and not one based on some idiot's interpretation of the Bible. This might be just me because I haven't heard anyone else say this, so I'll keep it short. But I think Jehovah's Witnesses really struggle with comparing themselves to others. After all, that's how the religion teaches them to act. They often tell people to look among other people in the congregation who are doing well to emulate them. And the only way that Jehovah's Witnesses have of comforting each other is by telling each other to compare themselves to others, usually Bible characters.
I knew what the Bible said about quit mixing in company with anyone who is not living according to Christian standards, but I never thought that scripture would one day apply to me. Later that evening, a brother was talking about the example of Korah's sons. The Bible tells us that his sons remained loyal to Jehovah and were blessed for it.
Everyone was against me. I didn't know what to do. But then I remembered a family worship. We studied about Caleb. What gave him the courage to be different? Jehovah is with us, he said. That helped me to remember that Jehovah's with me too.
Then she mentioned how scared she was to give talks or even go door to door. But then she found a good friend in the congregation. By imitating her friend's zeal, she eventually worked up the courage to start pioneering. Maybe if I reach out to Allison, she could be that friend for me.
I can only go from personal experience here, but since I can't remember, I've been comparing myself to other people as a way to measure my own success in any area. And I've struggled all my life to get rid of that damaging way of thinking that I would probably not have if the religion hadn't placed it in there. That's why the first step to get therapy is so crucial, because the religion's way of dealing with negative feelings is more damaging than the negative feelings themselves. If you notice that you're comparing yourself to others, stop it. You're not anyone else but you. You don't have anyone else's circumstances but yours and can only do your best with what you have. If you want to compare yourself to someone, compare yourself to who you were a year ago. Oh man, this is the part that's gonna piss everyone off. Jehovah's Witnesses have this supremacist and arrogant anti-science stand that makes them very conspiranoid, since they believe that the world is owned by Satan and that science, higher education, and even logic shouldn't be trusted. That leaves individual Jehovah's Witnesses free to come up with some of the craziest conspiracy theories you will ever hear. It was reportedly a large problem to get Jehovah's Witnesses to take the COVID vaccine, precisely because of this way of thinking. That's because cults work by hijacking your pattern recognition abilities that you use to interpret the world. We all interpret the world around us through patterns. That's how we're able to reason, how we're able to make music, and even how we're able to recognize faces. However, since you have that ability to find patterns, sometimes you might see patterns that aren't there. Like when you think a cloud resembles something, or pareidolia, when you see a face that isn't a face. Cults do the same thing. They interpret a set of patterns differently than the rest of the people and make a cult around those patterns, even if that means they need to deny science and anything that doesn't agree with them to keep interpreting the patterns the way the cult teaches them. When that happens, they get to feel like they're in this tiny enlightened majority because everyone else is being dumb trusting those scientists and people with logical thinking skills. And if you don't have any scientific, political, or logical knowledge like most Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll end up coming up with crazy explanations for the patterns you see every day. This happens because when you're in a cult, you have a different way of defining what's real. After all, you have to reject logical ways of thinking to be in any cult, which sometimes forces you to deny reality and see what you want to see. That's how Jehovah's Witnesses are convinced that they live perpetually in the times of the end, because they cherry pick any negative world event to recognize it as a pattern of the signs of the end of the system of things. When you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, you have to redefine how you consider something to be real. And I'm not saying go only by what you can touch or prove, because you can't touch or prove yourself that the earth is round. It's not like you can go up high enough to check up yourself. You can't literally prove yourself everything about everything you learn. So you'll have to decide how you'll differentiate between truth and falsehood. The absolute best way we have as humanity to do this is by following the scientific process. The scientific process is arguably the best method we have to arrive at objective truth. And it should be the method you use when you yourself are trying to prove something right or wrong. After all, the whole thing revolves around not trying to prove you're right, but trying to prove you're wrong until you can't. So if you can't do the scientific process by yourself in a specific subject to prove it, it makes sense to trust the results of someone who used that process to arrive at the truth. And that is what science is all about. Science is about arriving to the truth by proving everything else wrong. And when you can't prove yourself wrong on a topic, you can publish that, inviting other people with all kinds of backgrounds to prove you wrong too. This leaves room only for the truth to shine through, because if a hypothesis is right, it'll end up becoming the consensus, regardless of where it comes from. And if a theory is wrong, it will be discarded, regardless of how many people believe in it, or for how long they've believed it. And if we ever find some seemingly contradictory data, we have a way of knowing which one is trustworthy based on how tested the data has been. This is called the hierarchy of evidence pyramid, which I've shown before in the channel, and it places levels of evidence according to their relative strength. At the bottom we have editorials and expert opinions, aka one scientist said, which can range from an expert opinion to a whole hypothesis that just hasn't been tested yet. Whenever someone publishes a new book or a preliminary research, this is where that research is. Then we have different levels of conducting an experiment to prove something, from simple case reports where you're just reporting on circumstantial evidence, all the way to randomized control trials, where there's very little room for error. And finally, you have the top level, systematic and meta studies, where you study not the topic directly, but all the relevant studies you can find on a specific topic to determine what's true. The higher your evidence is in the hierarchy of evidence, the less likely it is to be false. After all, it's one thing if a doctor tells you what they think, it's another thing if the topic has been studied so well that multiple independent sources have arrived at the same conclusion. And besides that hierarchy of evidence, there's one more tool that will help you: Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a principle saying that if you have two explanations for an event, the simpler one is usually the correct one. Now, you sat through my hierarchy of evidence pyramid and Occam's razor definition, so you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with conspiracy theories? Well, to believe a conspiracy theory, you have to violate at least one of them, usually both. For example, many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses believe that this religion is secretly ruled by Masons, and use the fact that some governing body members use pinky rings and the fact that some early beliefs came from the Masons to prove that the Masons ruled this religion for reasons. But if you don't have any critical thinking skills, anything can fill up the vacuum caused by waking up. That's also why you see some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses remain misogynist, believing women are lesser than men or should be in subjection to their husbands, believing there's something inherently wrong with sex work or with women having consensual sex with other people, or believe in misogynist and patriarchal relationships. This goes against Occam's razor because you have to come up with increasingly more convoluted explanations to sustain that belief. And that belief has no clear reasoning or purpose, which is why I believe that all of those Mason theories are completely loony. Others can become anti-vaxxers, cherry-picking data from the bottom of the hierarchy of evidence pyramid into thinking the new vaccine is a form of sterilization and money-making scheme. They don't realize that the people pushing for those theories are the only people getting rich out of fooling people into thinking they are saying the truth and not scientists, just like cults do. Remember, as we mentioned before, science is the best way we have to approach to the truth. So every cult and cultish way of thinking will have to invalidate science first, knowing that they're going against it, because they know science invalidates them. And Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses might feel compelled to think like that because they teach, just like every other cult, that the truth is a hidden thing that most people can't find, and that you just so happen to luck into knowing this actual truth that most people don't know about. This makes you feel smart and special, like you're in the know when most of the world isn't. And believing in things like that can appeal to the tribalism you felt as a Jehovah's Witness. In reality, although not everything that goes against the hierarchy of evidence pyramid and Occam's razor is a cult or cultish behavior, every cult or cultish behavior will go against either the hierarchy of evidence or Occam's razor, usually both. On the other hand, you cannot make a cult if you follow both the hierarchy of evidence and the Occam's razor, by definition. I'm not saying every contrarian out there is wrong. After all, you have to contradict the norm to push science forward. However, if you find a contrarian that has to convince you to go against science or logic for their views to make sense, that's not a scientist. That's a grifter. The Jehovah's Witnesses have this almost utilitarian philosophy where the more good you do for the cult, the better chances you'll have at getting to paradise. It's often explained to converts as getting riches in heaven, which is how you're actually getting paid for all your unpaid work you do for the cult, you see. The issue is that that philosophy kind of fits very well with the philosophy that most people have in capitalistic societies, where you're worth whatever you make money-wise, you express yourself through your purchases, you think people work hard for their mansions and poor people are poor because they're dumb or unlucky and it's no one's fault, and you become worthless if you don't have money or any way to generate it. The problem with this philosophy is that this philosophy probably isn't you. This is a philosophy placed on you by late-stage capitalism. And it's probably a very bad philosophy to live your life by. This philosophy kind of fits with what Jehovah's Witnesses tell you when they tell you that the only point of being in the world is to make money. When you leave the Jehovah's Witness religion and you don't have the cult, you're like, well, I guess The point is to make money and be materialistic instead. That's why I encourage you to at least look into other philosophical ways of looking at the value and purpose of life by hearing more about different philosophical schools of thought. This will be extremely valuable as you're rebuilding your moral compass, giving excellent reasoning and better critical thinking and communication skills. Studying philosophy, at least enough to understand it, is the best way of finding out who you were supposed to be, and to replace your contradicting philosophy about life with one that makes more sense to you. Those are the main ways I've seen remaining indoctrination in ExJWs Witnesses. You probably noticed how I didn't directly call out anyone, even though I definitely had a lot of people in mind who you may probably know. That's because this isn't about calling anyone out. This is about how hard it can be to fully wake up from cult indoctrination. So if you see people struggling with something on this list, be kind instead of just calling them out. That being said, the only person you should feel free to call out is me. Writing this video, I was painfully aware that just as I was writing about behaviors that people don't notice they have, I could myself have behaviors that I'm yet to notice, but others watching this video might. So I'm not making this video to pretend that I'm done waking up and that I'm the only one who can figure out indoctrination. I'm not. If anything, I hope this does the opposite, inviting people to talk about their own remaining indoctrination. So hopefully I can learn from them and continue waking up and evolving as a person. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Jake from the Old Worldly channel, with whom I exchanged some ideas and stole a few more, don't tell him. And thank you to all my supporters who make it easier for me to spend all this time coming up with, researching, and writing these videos that I feel can be pretty valuable, at least for some people. I didn't just turn on a camera and started talking. Every word I said was scripted after a lot of thought and a lot of research. As I mentioned before, when I started this video, there's no manual to wake up from a cult, and that's mainly because we know so little about them and about how they affect us. So I feel the more I can learn and document about the damages of this one specific cult, the more I can help not only people waking up, but anyone in a position of power looking for a reason to stand up to cults and call them out for the abusers they are.